My name is Barbera. I'm the Dean of Humanities here at MassBay, and the OneBook project has been a very important part of the humanities and liberal arts curriculum here at MassBay for about a decade. So it's been a long-standing part of our academic culture here at MassBay Community College. Every year, with input from the faculty, students, staff, and the Wellesley community, we have a selection of books that are voted upon by the students and the community, faculty and support staff. And it essentially serves as a group read for our freshman English classes, but it's also a read across the college, and it's used in many classes. So it's really a great community building event here at the college. I'm pleased to welcome the panel. I'll be introducing them after I do a short introduction to the author of this year's selection, which is Into the Beautiful North. Probably many of you have seen this cover if you're in our English classes this term, by Alberto Urrea. I'm going to show a brief video just so that we all know a little bit about Urrea's work, and then I'll introduce the panel. Thank you. The pastor was listening to me review that Spanish. I said, well, yeah. From down the street. So the next week he said, hey, I'm going to another orphanage for a late night visit. Do you want to go? I said, sure. We went. Very interesting. And on the way home he said, doing anything Thursday? I said, no. And he said, have you ever been to the Tijuana garbage dump? I said, no. He said, you should come. I said, okay. So went to the Tijuana garbage dump. At the end of the day, he said, doing anything Saturday? And I said, why? What's happening Saturday? We're building houses at the Tijuana garbage dump. I said, well, that sounds like fun. And at the Tijuana dump on Saturday, he said, what are you doing tomorrow? And it was thanks to the pastor who said to me one day, you know, people who write books don't live in these paper shacks. He said, you live with these people. You know, you help them dig garbage out. You eat garbage with them. No one's ever written about them. You should do it.
Hi, I'm Alberto Urrea. I was born in Tijuana, believe it or not, and I came to the United States at about the age of 4, maybe 5. We lived in a barrio in Tijuana that was subjected to plagues of diseases. I had tuberculosis and several other sort of poverty diseases, so they brought me to the U.S. to get away from it. Into the Beautiful North, it's based on my family's traditional village in Mexico where they came from, and reporting that I had read over the years since working on immigration so much that these villages have no men left, all the men have come north. And I thought, what would happen in a town in Sinaloa without men when narco terrorists and smugglers discover the town and there's no one to defend it, and several young women see an old print of the Magnificent Seven in their village tropical movie theater and decide, wait a minute, we can do that. We can go to the United States and get 7 of these guys and bring them back. In my family, there's a certain love of Yul Brynner, partially because he had a house in Puerto Vallarta, and some of my more distant relatives kept arguing that he was Mexican. It's Yul Brynner, Mexicano, and he tiene casa in Puerto Vallarta. And we'd say, listen, the guy's not Mexican, please. And so this becomes a little thing in the book, that the aunt in the book, who becomes the mayor of Tres Camarones, insists that Yul Brynner is Mexico's greatest actor. And I don't think a lot of Americans understand that many people in Mexico don't like this. It's not like Mexicans have an illegal immigration organ in their body and at 14 kicks off a hormone and shows them how to come to the United States illegally. It's a question of desperation for the vast majority of them, and it causes shame and embarrassment at home. So Nayeli's from a family that is ashamed of all of this. And she has this heroic strain in her. And she wants to save her village, not necessarily herself, which is what's interesting to me. And I think that's what makes heroes, is people who move out of self-interest into interest for the common good.
Okay, great. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our 3 faculty panelists. Each panelist will be discussing various facets of the novel for about 10 minutes, and then we'll open up to questions from students in the audience. Our first panelist is Professor Margaret Crowe, who teaches history part-time for us and also served as the OneBook coordinator over the last year. Our second panelist is Julia Heffernan, who is a learning specialist and also professor of English. And our third panelist is Mena, who is professor and chair of world languages. Margaret, please.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on Luis Urrea and some context for this book. Luis Alberto Urrea was born in 1955 in Tijuana, Mexico. His mother was American and his father was a Mexican farmer. He has spent his life straddling the border, growing up mostly in America, but always with family and friends on both sides of that divide. He has experienced firsthand how artificial and yet brutal that line in the sand can be. In The Devil's Highway, he reflects on the irony of the situation where European incomers divided up territories, and then he calls them the first illegal immigrants, the European incomers to the Americas. They divided up territories, and then they tell indigenous people they're illegal based on which side of a line they stand on. And that a lot of the people who come from Latin America, quote unquote, illegally to the United States are actually of indigenous origin. So he recontextualizes a lot of these things for us. And it's important to realize the range of background behind Into the Beautiful North. Luis Urrea studied at the University of California in San Diego and at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And he writes and is recognized in many different genres. He's a best-selling author with 13 books to his credit, and I gather there are several more on the way, perhaps as many as 3 books in the next year. I think a novel, a book of short stories, and a book of poetry. I don't know what the publishers want them all coming out the same year, but he has 3 books that are close to completion. Okay, it's supposed to result in the slide going forward. All right, if you can just do that manually. I don't know why the clicker is not cooperating. Nice sound effect. Okay, so it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go on to the next slide. Actually.
Just signal when you like.
Yeah, just go on to the next slide. Okay. I had tried to click it before, nothing happened. So just move on to the next slide. Thank you. Picture of Luis Urrea. He writes fiction, everything from novels to shorts. No, let's keep it on that slide. Thank you. He writes everything from fiction to novels to short stories. His fiction includes everything from historical novels to current topics, from gritty realities to magical realism, which will be touched upon more in Professor Mena's presentation. Luis Urrea is also a poet and an author of a variety of nonfiction works. Everything from memoir to very serious essays and substantial research works like The Devil's Highway. So some of his very gritty nonfiction provides a backdrop for the lighter story that he's telling in Into the Beautiful North. He's won numerous awards and is a member of the Latino Literature Hall of Fame. The Devil's Highway is an account of a group of Mexican immigrants who get lost in the Arizona desert, and it won the Lannan Literary Award and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and the Pacific Rim Kiriyama Prize. His historical novel, The Hummingbird's Daughter, won the Kiriyama Pacific Rim Prize. He's also won the American Book Award, the Christopher Award, the Western States Book Award for Poetry, and his short story, Amapola, won the Edgar Award. So he's been recognized across many different genres. He's not only a writer of fiction. He brings all of these different things to bear. His works have also inspired adaptation to other forms, including the wonderful graphic novel, Mr. Mendoza's Paintbrush, and both The Devil's Highway and Into the Beautiful North have been optioned for films. So there's possibilities of movies based on both of those. I think the latter is particularly fitting given that his characters within Into the Beautiful North are inspired by seeing The Magnificent Seven and also remind us of that film's antecedent, The Seven Samurai, which the Wellesley Public Library is going to be showing soon as part of the discussion of this book. Well, Into the Beautiful North is anchored in Mexican characters and culture. It is as once a universal quest tale and also an American story of the road. Luis Urrea has seen up close the kinds of challenges his characters face. He was a relief worker, helping people in some of the most difficult conditions on Earth, scraping survival from the garbage dumps of Latin America, a reality which Professor Julia Heffernan's presentation will hopefully help bring to life to you a bit. Yeah, next. Urrea advocates for immigration reform and for just treatment of refugees. This is a picture from the Tijuana garbage dumps. His writing presses us to recognize our shared humanity, even with people experiencing challenges and conditions we find difficult to imagine. Some of the kindest and bravest people the travelers Into the Beautiful North encounter are in the Tijuana garbage dump, in some of the harshest possible conditions imaginable. So he challenges us with that, with their humanity, with their kindness, asks us to identify with them, not just dismiss them. Next slide, please. Luis Urrea is also a professor. Even with all of the success of his writing, he continues to teach. He teaches creative writing at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He has taught at the University of Colorado, the University of Louisiana, Lafayette, Harvard, and right here at MassBay Community College. I think we should be very proud of that connection and celebrate that as we go on to examine his work.
So our next speaker is Professor Heffernan, and just let me know when you'd like your slides to come.
All right. As Professor Crowe said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Tijuana garbage dump. But really, before I do that, I'd like to say that I co-teach English 90 with Sean, and so a lot of what I'm going to be telling you comes from our class discussions, what we've talked about, what we ponder, what our reaction to the dump has been. We are about halfway through the book, and we find ourselves talking again and again about the tone of the book. Professor Crowe mentioned that he has some works that are grittier, that are the facts, the harsh realities, and yet this book has a lighter tone. It has comedy, it has humor interlaced with and actually following directly upon the heels of some very difficult scenes. And so we wonder about that. And does that, the questions we ask ourselves in our class, does that undercut the seriousness of the message that he's trying to tell us, these harsh realities that he's trying to teach us about, that he's trying to bring to our attention? Does that humor undercut it? Or does that humor enable us as readers to make it through what might be an otherwise difficult section or difficult chapter? Urrea himself has some conflicting ideas about this, or I'm sure he's, depending on the interview, I guess, it depends on the side that he might highlight, but he says, after the torture of writing The Devil's Highway and the turmoil of completing The Hummingbird's Daughter, I needed a break. So I set out to make myself happy. But I also thought that if I made myself laugh out loud every day, perhaps you would laugh too. And we all needed a laugh. So when you hear that quote, it sounds like it's just a very light book and only light. On the other hand, he also says, still, I had made a vow to God a long time ago that I would keep elements of witness and service in everything I wrote. So I worked very consciously to embed elements of social commentary, subversion, surprise, and humanity in every part of the book. I thought, when he read it over after it was done, he said, I thought it had some of the most humanitarian and provocative stuff in any writing that I had ever written. And the initial chuckles may have hid some of that. So I think when we talk about this in our class, where the tone seems most surprising to us in a way is in the dump. when you hear about the dump, when you read the reality of the dump, when you hear the statistics of the dump, it's overwhelming. It's almost inconceivable that life can happen there. And yet, it's really one of the softest places, and it's the softest landing spot in the first half of the book. As Nayeli and her friends make their way north, they are manhandled on the bus by soldiers with huge guns. They watch a young Colombian couple that's trying to immigrate through Mexico. They see them unceremoniously yanked off the bus and thrown in the back of a Humvee. At the customs station, they see Tacho bullied and sexually molested. When they get to Tijuana, they have lost their luggage. Tacho's radio is stolen. And then in the middle of the night, Nayeli and her friends are almost gang raped by a group of men. So their journey north is filled with these stark realities. And then the next morning they meet Don Porfirio and Doña Araceli, and they said, well, come home with us and share a meal. And you don't realize that where they're going, the home that they are taken to, is a home in the dump. And yet, in that home, when they walk to the home, Don Porfirio is standing at the door and he says, welcome, welcome, life is good. And he's not being sarcastic, he means it. And they share food, and Doña Araceli whips up a meal for them, and the girls say, genuinely, this is delicious, this is wonderful. And the life that they have in the dump, the community, they pray over dinner, and they say, God is good, this is a feast, and it's genuine. There are tears that roll down Don Porfirio's face as he says that, it's genuine. And their home is made of things salvaged from the dump. The fence that surrounds their home in the dump is made out of rusty bed springs. And yet all along the rusty bed springs, flowers bloom, roses of every color. Doña Araceli has planted flowers of every color. And so there's this tug, what is the reality? Is this something harsh, or is this really, an okay way to live? So as we talked about it, we researched it, we looked for it to see what we could find, and we found that, as is hinted or mentioned in the book, the dump closed. The book was published in 2009. The dump was in the process of being closed between 2007 and 2009. At the point of the story, Atomico was trying to figure out what his next move is. We found an article in the San Diego Tribune written about the dump, and as it was about to be closed. And I have that link for you later if you're interested. But basically, they interview a family that lived in the Tijuana dump. The article comes with a 54-slide photo slideshow of life in the dump. And you hear it narrated in the voice of Guillermo Torres Robles, I believe. And he had lived in the dump for 17 years with his family, and he was not happy about the idea that the dump was going to be closed. It was his home, it was his job, it was his livelihood. The promise was that there was going to be a waste recycling center built nearby, and it would be done legitimately, but he was afraid that he would lose his job. He was afraid that the family would lose their income, and they were concerned about the future. And one other thing, I do want to say that when I was reading this book for the first time this summer, and I got to the chapters on the dump, they just held me. And there's a passage in the book that Nayeli says the same thing. It shook her, this place. It was awful, tragic, and yet it moved her. The sorrow she felt, it was profound. The sorrow of the terrible abandoned garbage dump and the sad graves and the lonesome shacks made her feel something so far inside of herself that she could not define it or place it. And I felt that same way. And I have to say that along with that, honestly, at the same time I was reading this, my sister and two of her children were at the Managua dump in Nicaragua doing relief work, doing the same kind of relief work that Urrea had done for a number of years in the Tijuana dump. And so I asked my nephew and my niece if they would come to our class and share with our class their findings. And so they did. They were here with our class about a week and a half ago. And the pictures that they had, I just have a few here, but the pictures that they brought matched the pictures of Urrea's description. They matched the pictures of the Tijuana dump. And I think there are a number of really strong parallels. And yet they brought some stories that, as they shared them with our class, we had class members who gasped and class members who were shocked. And this little fellow's story, just briefly, his name is Davin. He lived in the Managua dump with his family and his older brothers. And one Easter morning, his brothers had been out foraging and scavenging, and they found what they thought was a bonanza. They found some peanuts. And it was Easter Sunday, and this was going to be the Easter treat. And his brothers ate the peanuts, and they died. The peanuts were toxic. The peanuts were rancid. And so Davin did not eat for a couple of years. The relief workers fed him with baby food because he really believed that eating killed you. And so he now has been relocated, and that was the work that my sister and her kids were doing, but they were relocating families to a village just outside. So this is going to be, these are just a couple of the pictures of the dump that seemed so much like what I saw in the Tijuana news article, but also in Urrea's description. You can go on. Thank you, Chris, one more. Again, very similar. These are pictures that my niece and nephew brought. Okay. And one more, Chris. Thank you. Okay. And then these are the statistics, and I won't go through all of them with you, but these are the statistics that my niece and nephew shared about the Managua dump. But the 53% halfway down, that's the percentage of the people living in the dump who are children. So more than half of the people living in the dump are children. The other two down at the bottom, and this is, I think, where the concern about the recycling plant comes in. The amount of garbage that comes in is worth, I believe it's a year, is worth $20 million. But at the door of the Managua dump, anyway, the gate, they have a middle layer. People who are not quite as poor, but they're at the gateway, and they're going through the dump, taking anything valuable out. And so the garbage that actually makes its way into the dump has very little of value in it. And I think this is one of the concerns about the recycling plant. You know, who's going to skim off the top of this, and what's really going to be left for the families? And in the case of the Managua dump, families were living, people were earning $1.20 a day. Okay. And then the next slide, there are some more numbers. 214 families, again, this is the Managua dump, but 214 families lived there. 4 years old, that's the age that people started working in the dump. When you were 4 years old, you went to work and you worked 10-hour days. 8 years old is the age at which many women, girls, started prostituting themselves because they needed money, and that was something available, and the people who used them as prostitutes were the men who drove the garbage trucks. 14 years old was the age by which almost all the girls in the dump were prostituting themselves. And 19 years old was the age by which most of the, at least I think he said half of the children in the dump had died by age 19. On the other side, we just see some of the realities, the respiratory problems, the parasites, the gastrointestinal diseases, the skin infections, lead poisoning, poor hygiene, drug abuse, and child abuse. Child abuse is within the families, but again, it's also by the municipal workers who are in the dump moving the garbage. So, and there's obviously several similarities, as I've been saying, between the dump in the book and what my niece and nephew showed. But I do have to say that at the end of their talk, when my niece and nephew, and they're 16 and 13 years old, by the way, and Marty, the nephew, this was the second time that he had gone. It's an ongoing project that their community does. But both of them said that their overwhelming feeling when they left was like Urrea's. You know, they were struck by the generosity of spirit, the sheer spirituality, the genuine spirituality, the kindness, the goodness. They worked alongside the families building the homes. They played alongside them soccer, basketball in their dirt fields. And they left with a very positive sense of community as well. And in one of the interviews, Urrea says, these chapters about the dump are the dearest part of the book and to the north to him. And I would have to agree.
Great. Sounds like magic realism. My slides don't go in order, so you have to just chill them around. So I teach Spanish courses here at MassBay. I'm originally from Costa Rica, so when I volunteered for this discussion, I said, oh, a Latino has to be present so that I can give you my point of view. From the Latino perspective. I moved to the U.S. when I was 16. I ended up in Iowa. I went to my last year of high school was in New York, and then went to Iowa for my undergrad, and then Minnesota and Wisconsin for graduate school. So I can see myself portraying Nayeli in a way, you know, where I was thinking about this beautiful North, you know, all the way from Costa Rica. I ended up in a country that wasn't mine, and finding myself, you know, in the Midwest, which is way different from this area. And after 10 years, I said, you know, this is not where I belong. I need to get out of here and go somewhere else. And then coming to the New England area, and you know, it's like not Tijuana, but I mean going from, you know, one part of the States into another, where you can see that the U.S. is way different, you know, everywhere you go. Everything, I mean, I'm going to go back to magical realism and what it is, but if you read the story and you see these people coming to the U.S., you know, the friends of Nayeli, they're not here to stay, and they want to get their father, get 7 people, and go back to Tijuana, where they belong. Not Tijuana, sorry, Sinaloa. This is what magic realism is about. Sometimes we read a story and we don't understand it very well because from your eyes you see, the Mexicans or the illegal people or the immigrants, they want to come to this country, they want to stay here. But in this case, they don't want to stay here. They want to go back to their country. So when the writer, when the author combines reality with fantasy, that's when you find yourself wondering, is this true? Is this happening? Now, Urrea does a great job from 2 points of view. If a Latino reads this story, he or she will be like wondering, okay, yeah, the magic realism is going to a new country because it sounds wonderful to be there. But from the point of view of an American reading the story, he or she will be like, wow, I can't believe this is really happening in the South, or in Mexico in this case. So that combination of reality and fantasy, where sometimes we find ourselves, I don't believe this, is what a lot of Latino writers, Garcia Marquez and Isabel Allende, they're all doing nowadays. Isabel Allende, because Garcia just passed away last year. But I find myself teaching Latin American literature here at MassBay, and the students read something from Borges, from any one of these writers, and they're like, we don't understand this reading. Why? Because it's full of magic realism. Now, when you read this story, and it makes you laugh, but sometimes it makes you wonder, is this happening? Is this true? How can these people, from this postcard that she got from her father, she realized, wow, this is a wonderful place to go and visit. And this postcard is showing a cornfield, because this is the Midwest, with a turkey passing around the street or across the street. And this is wonderful, in her eyes. So why? Because she doesn't see that in Mexico. So she gathers her friends. She goes to the Midwest, Illinois, this tiny little town, where, according to Urrea, is one of the worst areas in the U.S. to grow up. So you probably never heard of the town. What is it called? Kankakee? In the middle of nowhere. But for these Latino friends and for her, this is a wonderful place. Now, for somebody from here, would they go back to one of these Mexican towns and find it wonderful? Probably not. So in her eyes, going through all this journey, these friends encounter not only, racism, but ugliness, stupidity, sympathy. So they experience a lot. The book talks about the Mexican border. This wall in between the two countries is like a scarf. And if you read it carefully and you start thinking, imagine realism, yeah, the fantasy. And for somebody who has never seen that wall, they don't understand what it means. But I mean, there are walls everywhere, not only have to be that one. But, there are many different walls. Urrea was saying in one of his interviews, even in my house there's a wall. My mom and my dad, she was her kitchen, and she's English and he's Mexican, and she goes, this is my wall. But he represents, that wall represents a scarf, where Urrea wants to unite the two countries. It won't happen. Urrea is thinking about this group of people, Mexican people, who come into the country, not just to stay in the country like most of us think of illegals or immigrants, but they want to go back. They want to go back to the country or to the city or place where they are from, and bring this man, because they are just going away. And it's happening right now. This is not something that you will read and say, oh, is this magic? Is this happening? It is happening right now with a lot of children. Not only, they have to be meant to come back to the U.S., but a lot of children are leaving their countries. And coming from Costa Rica, this is not happening so much in Costa Rica, but in Central America, I had the chance to visit a lot of these countries. And you interview people, you see children, you see people who are saying, we just need to get out of here. This is being invaded by narcos, or they're just don't have jobs. Or so for you to talk about the garbage dump and thinking, is this real? We see those around. We not until you get immersed in the settings of these countries, you see children digging out, food because they don't have anything at home. So I found the book is a wonderful, kind of like from the 2 points of views. I mean, Urrea being from Mexico, writing to an audience that is American, but at the same time, any Latino who reads the book will find out that he plays 2 roles, magic realism from the Latino point of view, but also from the American point of view, because sometimes we don't understand the concept. Even when they were sitting on the roof, and Yolo and Nayeli, they were looking at the clouds, and they were like, oh, those might come from Manhattan, that must be New York. I mean, that's a dream. And sometimes these kids, teenagers are dreaming about what is the U.S. like. We get nowadays, you get a lot of cable and TV shows showing what the U.S. is about, but that's in their minds. They want to come here thinking that everything is wonderful and everything is going to be, easy for them, which is not. And pretty much we see people staying in this country. No, what that represents, they want to go back. They have a desire not to stay in the U.S. but to go home and build up their city. Like I said, the Mexicans who are coming to this town in Illinois, I cannot pronounce the name, are there to stay. The town is happy to have them. Why? Because they're building up the little town that was dead. A lot of Americans don't want to do their job that they probably are doing, so they're welcoming them. Now they became a sister city of this Sinaloa city in Guanajuato, Mexico, because the 2 mayors, talked about it and they said, let's open the doors. But in a way, I found the book, full of magical realism in that way. From my point of view, as a Latino, I read it and I see things that if I haven't been in the U.S., I wouldn't understand. But because I've been in both countries, so Latin American and the U.S., I said, this is a great way to combine the 2 ideas. And then reading it from this point of view of Americans is also magic, because you see the Mexican way of portraying this town, So that's what I have to say.
Great. Thank you so much for we'd like to open it up for open discussion. The questions you ask can be of the panelists. They can be general questions that anyone could answer. And I do have a microphone. Are there any questions, thoughts about your reading of Into the Beautiful North?
Are you all in the middle of it right now? Or have you started it yet? Are you finished?
How far have you gone?
Middle.
I have a question. So, do you think that humor is the only way to deal with some of these very serious topics? What do you think? And because you kind of pointed to the use of humor as a literary technique in this book. So I was just kind of curious about whether you think humor is the most effective way to deal with some things like tragedy, some of the very tragic events that you were witnessing in your own volunteer work as well.
I can answer. In one of the interviews that I saw, somebody asked Urrea that very question. And they said, in fact, did you create the character of Atomiko to be almost comic relief in the middle of the dump? And he said, no, not 1,000th of 1%. He said, people are complex. People are, even people in the direst situations still are human. They still have senses of humor. He said during his time there, he felt that he just saw the fullness of life, even in the characters there. He said they refused to be a cartoon. And so as much as I want to say that humor gets me through, he's not using it as a device to get you through. He feels that just an aspect of humanity, and if you're going to report on humanity, you have to tell the whole story. That being said, we've also just watched one of the talks that he gave up in Sitka, Alaska, when he talks that, this one is called Children at the Border, and there's no humor in it. It's just the straight facts and some stories that just make your hair stand on end. It's a very different feel. It's you know, without it, our class is going to see it tomorrow, and we'll be interested to see how they react to what they're learning. We're also in the second half of the book now. We're in the North. The North, our students find, is much easier reading. It doesn't have all the trauma and the scary scenes of the first book.
Right.
And yet, I am pretty sure that they're never going to forget some of the things that we learned or that they talked about in the first half. So is the humor effective? Did it get it through? Yes. Does he intentionally use it that way? He says he does not. So I think it's interesting.
Yeah, Margaret.
I wanted to comment on that as well, because I've been reading some of his other work, particularly his nonfiction work. The audio book of The Devil's Highway is actually read by Urrea himself, which I think is wonderful when authors read their own books for recordings. And you want to see the opposite of humor getting you through brutal situations. Listen to his description of death by dehydration, by baking in the sun, and the multiple steps of that, of drinking one's own urine repeatedly as you gradually die of dehydration. I mean, he can absolutely take the most direct, factual, brutal approach to these things as well. Is that going to carry people through something in the same way that but even with it, I was going to say all of the diversity within the beautiful North does. No, but even then, the way that it's softened in some ways in The Devil's Highway is not avoiding the brutality, but it's the beauty of his language, the way that he sort of deals with the desert as desolation, as enemy, and yet as beautiful, and the way that the quality of his language and the literary quality of that in some ways does the same thing, that allows you to get through some things that are pretty horrid to comprehend.
I have one more follow-up question, Margaret, because I saw your next slide. We didn't get there, but I'm going to show everybody.
I have another.
Sorry, this is about the role of women in the story. And I feel like when we read into the beautiful North, gender is just a huge part of this novel. And maybe the students have seen how female characters and male characters play in this novel a little bit differently. Maybe the students might remark on
that. And especially in a context like Latin America, where it's a very macho society, he is, Nayeli plays an important role as being this female character who is the one who takes the initiative to leave their town and journey into the U.S. And that's another aspect of magical realism, because in real life, I don't think that will happen. Where women are treated in a different way than men in our society, and for her to be the one saying, I'm going to find my father, and she got all these friends with her. I think that the book makes her a hero, a heroine. So where that's Urrea's point of view, he's like, my characters are heroes. Yes?
Going along with that, I mean, do you think possibly that would happen? What about Aunt Irma, do you think that sort of character probably would be?
Well, let's take into consideration that these are small, tiny towns. The reason why she was the mayor of that town was because there were no men left. So the women were ruling the town in a way that, without men, they were the ones, trying to survive. I believe that that's something that if we read it, from my point of view, we will be like, that wouldn't happen. I mean, not until late 20th century, more and more women are becoming, more into, playing a more important role. But before, that wasn't happening. So I think that I had a slide there because I think that Nayeli represents this character that, will be hard to find in a lot of these stories.
But I'm going to jump in and say I really struggle with the role of women in this book. I have a very hard time with it. Nayeli was the star on the soccer team. She took to taekwondo. She's the leader. She steps up. She encourages her troops on when everybody else wants to turn back and they're crying. And yet, at the border, she bats her eyelashes. At the border patrol, when she's in the detention center, she sort of smiles her way through. But even at the very base of their journey is to go find 7 men and bring them back. And their plan, their strategy along the way is, one, when you're in Tijuana, call Chava, a male, Chava, and then when you cross the border, call Matt, another male. So for me, I do think she's heroic and I think she's striving toward it, but I think it's very hard to break away from the male-dominated, perhaps, history that that she's trying perhaps to emerge from. But it's hard for me in some of these spots. I just want her to be even stronger.
I think that a lot of this has to do with cultural context, too, because I think that the way that Marco perceives it versus the way that, say, an American woman would perceive it, and certainly Urrea himself had said that making a Latina, and a young Latina especially, but making a Latina an action hero is a subversive act. Hello. Is part of the subversive subtext, also making illegals the heroes of an American novel, and there are several ways in which this is intentionally subversive. We probably, in our context, see her as not going far enough, but from a Latin American context, she's actually maybe quite a radical character, and he may be trying to find some sort of middle ground there, but he's acting in a mixed cultural context.
And I can't jump off the topic without saying my favorite. I love Tacho. And I think Tacho, from what our students in our class tell us, he's countercultural. Our students in our class say he wouldn't be tolerated in a number of the communities with which they were familiar in their various countries. And yet, to me, he's the strongest man in the book. He bounces back, he's strong, he has his subversive way of sticking it to the people who are trying to oppress him. I love Tacho.
Well, that was actually part of one of the same interviews that I saw talking about
the subversive.
Yeah, talking about the subversive element. Young women, a gay man, dispossessed people from the dump. These all of these people that are perhaps marginalized by mainstream macho Latino society are the people that carry this story.
And Urrea mentions in one of the interviews that he made these characters heroes, and some of them do exist. And when he goes back to Mexico and tells them, hey, I made you a hero, and they're like, really? Because, he's using different names, of course, but these characters do exist. And the town that, even though he calls the town Tres Camarones, it's a different town where he grew up in Sinaloa, but everything represents something that is real. And that's what I was talking about before when I said, if you read it and you probably hear these names and these towns, and for you they don't make sense. But in reality, they do exist and they are down there, and people probably live the way he described it, if not now, maybe a few years ago. But that's what fantasy and reality, makes sometimes it's hard to understand. And it's kind of cool to read it and say, hey, I'm reading something that was real. It is real. Any other questions?
An assignment that came through the writing lab, and I don't know if any students are here, but it had to do with taking this story and also taking a story of a heroic journey. And so the student came in and said, I Googled heroic journey, and I didn't find anything I could use. And so I thought, okay, we've got to put down, we didn't have time to talk, but I thought, we've got to put down heroic journey literature, heroic journey history. But I've been thinking about that, haven't had a chance to talk to her, but I've been thinking about that ever since then. And so give me some advice here. What could be a heroic journey that she could build into this with her paper, this assignment, I mean, with this story and a heroic journey that she picks out. And I've been thinking of movies. I've been thinking of lots of different things.
I mean, of course, there's a Matt. You want?
I was just going to say Joseph Campbell, had put into words a lot of the mythology of the hero's journey in so many ways. But to go back and talk about gender roles, somebody asked, like, well, how is the hero's role different from the heroine's role? And it's like, well, heroines don't have journeys because they've already found the answer. The answer is the mother, the woman, and it's like, what? So there's a lot of things, again, you put it within context of time period and culture. But there are so many stages that, his articulation and the same kind of, steps on journey have been almost like a blueprint for the Hollywood movie. Too much so because it's one structure, it's one architecture for the hero's journey. But I think that looking at that kind of structure, who is it? John, not Voight. I'm trying to remember what the author is who gave sort of like the synopsis of his work, of Campbell's work. Yeah, exactly, right. That applying that, you can say, okay, along these steps here, and I know some people, I don't want to give spoiler alerts. Well, I do want to give a spoiler alert, I don't want to give spoilers. That a lot of things that happen at the end, sort of like, okay, it's the hero's journey to a point, and then we have from San Diego to Tijuana, it becomes a different leg. We look at different legs of the journey, but it's leaving the familiar. A call to action, again, the idea of the hero being something beyond the individual and for the self. The people who resist the call, the friends and people who say it's dangerous. And then the sort of the struggles along the way, the encounter with racism that they see in San Diego and all those things. There's definitely a structure there that can be applied to the novel. And then some places where you say this diverges from many blueprints.
I'm not sure they were looking for structure. I think it was for a journey that they were going to find,
Any movie they've ever seen in their life.
Well, and of course the book itself references two films. It references The Magnificent Seven and the Seven Samurai. But the quest idea goes back to Chaucer and beyond. I mean, and it is very much. The American road movie too. You have that sort of whole more specific pattern that this is referencing. It's in some ways it's an American take on something that goes back at least as far as Chaucer.
Well, Odyssey.
Yeah. That's that. Yeah. So, anybody else want to? Marco, you and I were having a conversation, and this goes to Matt's movie analogy. The Wizard of Oz. The strange and different land, the assorted helpers with
That's also. What's that?
Beowulf.
Should we related to that one in the sense that she was talking about for a different journey, since Beowulf came from one nation to another to help defeat the monsters, which in this case I would link it to the Narcos. And a yellow being Beowulf trying to rescue her town.
When I read a text or a book, I like to come up with or think about what the purpose is. So reading this book, I didn't really quite come up with what the purpose of it is. I thought maybe it's to educate or inform people about something, but I just thought it was kind of important.
Purpose of the novel? What do you think?
Like, what's the purpose? What's the message that the author is trying to give out?
Do you think there is a concrete message?
There's always a message.
I noticed that.
So interesting.
No, well, and this is from Urrea. He says that this is not a political book.
Right.
That's why he wanted to write something that would make people laugh. But although I found that, and this is good, that it has some, ideas immigration is one of the topics, that you encounter. Also, the narcos invading Mexican towns. All of this, even though he's not touching those, very deep, I realize that whoever reads this book, and if you're reading the news and you know what's going on in Latin America, then I realize that he's trying to teach to the ones who don't know too much about it, but also to inform the ones who know about it that this is or has been going on. I don't know how the book is, but every time I read a book, and I tend to analyze it in a way that, is this magic realism? but I see that he is telling us that this is happening. Even though it's no way, political, you tend to read something that you read it in the paper also, in the papers. The narcos are now invading a lot of towns in Mexico, and people are living into Mexico City or places where they don't really want to move to, but they have to. So it's how you see it, and from which point of view you see it.
It's not political with a capital P, but I think if you look at his, if you look at his body, if you look at his body of work, there are themes, there are ideas, there are points that kind of run through it. And when I say that there's a single purpose in the book, perhaps not, but I think that there are multiple ones, and we've touched upon some of them here about humanity, things related to immigration and the challenges there, to the artificiality and brutality of the border, as I mentioned, to the idea of things that are both very universal and yet very culturally specific. Because we have them, we have the main characters in the book being inspired by an American movie, The Magnificent Seven, but he makes sure that one of his characters informs us that that is inspired by the Seven Samurai. So that's almost like an elbow in the ribs of, so this is a universal tale. This is cross-cultural in more ways than one.
Can I ask you what you think it's about, or what were you thinking it might be about?
I just thought it was there's a lot going on in that country where don't really know about her. So I thought simply to educate or pretty much just let the audience explore that world. The different world that they're not familiar with.
That works?
Professor
Listen, so much of interest here about journey and quest, just to direct it to them. And thank you to the gentleman who referenced Beowulf, as we're just finishing up some papers on that virtually. But just the word immigration has movement in it, and education to lead out of has movement. And virtually every hero or anti-hero in literature is on some sort of quest or journey or traveling experience as this simple metaphor of working through life on way to death, as the gentleman pointed out about Beowulf, goes to help someone else as a youth. At the end, unfortunately passes because of his own sense of mortality that has to happen to him. We can go all the way back to the Greeks, to Ulysses, and then of course even in the Brits, Beowulf and Arthur in the Quest, and Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales. They're all moving. I think the key is movement, as opposed to being still and decay. Decay is the enemy in a sense, and lifelessness is the enemy. And the notion of movement for all of those students, I think, in fact, the idea of a journey or a quest is a great idea for a course, it seems to me. Because there are so many different levels. I mean, even the anti-hero in John Gardner's Grendel is on this fascinating quest to, the monster who is an existential, crying, whining mama's boy, who hates the cave, hates his mother, wants to kill everybody, but still is kind of likable, I mean, God bless John Gardner for doing that. I mean, students can get a sense of how quests lead us in different ways. But we're all on them. And that's the beauty of being able to identify this, and whether it's male or female or cultural or psychological, space journeys, land journeys, sea journeys. Everybody's moving. So anyway, thanks for letting me.
If I could just add to that the movement is about change, or that change accompanies it, and that's what I see in books where a character's, what's the arc for that character from who they are at the beginning of the story to who they are at the end of the story? What have they learned? What is their view of the world? How has it changed? And that's what captures me most in books, is what's happened to one or more of the characters for them to grow in some way.
And I'll just add one other piece about the quest that I think is interesting. We're so focused on Nayeli's quest and that of her friends in the book, but we missed the others. Aunt Irma followed her bowling north, and then she came back. Matt came down, and his quest was to be a missionary, but then he went back north. That hadn't worked out. But then he went up to San Francisco to eat sushi and date ballerinas. And so, and his mother came from Virginia, and she quested over to San Diego. And so Atomico, he joined the army, and he was going to go on that quest, but it did. But so even with all the characters within the book have been on their individual quests and seen where they took them. Yes?
And I think one of the, there's an honor symposium next month as part of the OneBook series. And I think the title of that, if I'm right, I'm not sure if I'm right about this, is The Magical Gap. And one of the things that really struck me about the book was how permeable these borders are. When you think about the notion of border, as we're going to get to the perimeter of Arizona, and there's just a big wall. And it's sort of, that's an artificial sense of boundaries, that boundaries are fluid, they're permeable, and you just made that great point about how everyone's moving in every different direction. So I think that, in a sense, for me, is part of what he's trying to accomplish here, is to show us how fluid we are between back and forth along that journey.
I had a few reactions to the panel, and I have to admit I have not read the book, so this is a quick study reaction. But to me, whether he meant it to be a political book or not, it's a tremendously political book for people in this country reading it, because there is such great resistance to immigration. And as Nina just said, we put up walls. And it's one of the points he made in the quick review I read, that the borders are artificial. And this is a completely tangential remark, but I was riding with a cab driver in Washington, D.C. last weekend, and he said, I'm from Ethiopia and Somalia, and if you were born after 1940, you don't know when the border was drawn by the British, but if you were born before then, you knew there was no border, that it was just a vast land that we're all nomadic in. So the political point that I hear is that there's such great resistance to immigrants coming, and immigrants coming illegally. And the border has been drawn. And what I first hear him saying is that poor people living in poor countries have great character. I think the humor shows a great love of life and appreciation of life. The fine meal in the dump with all the spirit says that even though you're poor, you're filled with life and vitality. And I think there's a comparison then to, does America, the target land, have as much genuine vitality and life? And that's what it leads me to interpret. And that immigrants have such a tough time coming to this country, regardless of what age they came, and their names are changed, and they want you to change your culture immediately and become an American. And what I hear is they go through the border, again from the panel, is the coping style, that these are highly resilient people. And is it being shown that they're even more resilient than Native Americans? And just to finish, that all that they bring are what immigrants bring that will make America richer, stronger, and more resilient, excuse me. So I think it's a very political book, by intent or not.
Yes.
I think it's also slightly look at the book in the back, and he's got a very strong female lead in the book. And like you were saying, Mexican culture is macho, male-dominated. That strong female lead, probably in their literature, doesn't really happen. We've got TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like, you know, every single jostling production ever, you know, Firefly, all of those things that portray women as having the power to affect their destiny and change where they're going and do what they want. I think that maybe he's, you know, trying to get on a little bit of a soapbox to girls and females in general and say, you have the power to affect your own destiny, and you can go on a journey just like she is. In fact, you are on one. You just, it may be different than what she's doing.
One of the things we haven't mentioned in the context of that as well is that, you know, it's not actually beats up skinheads, you know, that come to attack. She becomes a defender, along with, you know, a couple of her fellows, of a group of largely males that are intimidated by the system, the power structure, the people that are coming in. She becomes a physical defender of them and triumphs physically as well. When it comes to the change over time and the change in the character and where that's going, of course, I don't want to present a spoiler to the people who are working on this book, but in a sense, she triumphs over her own, what she thinks is her own objective, in a way, for those of us who've read the whole book. And I'll leave it that vague for the people who haven't finished it yet.
I believe that women are gaining more power nowadays in Latin America. You have seen countries where presidents have been women, including Costa Rica. But before, and he's teaching us a lesson by you know, having Nayeli as the main character, or one of the main characters, because like I said before, not too many books will use the main character as being this powerful. Because you can see women as being main characters, but she's so powerful at the age of 19. I mean, she's still young. So I will say, you know, going back to your question, is teaching us something from there.
Yeah, also targets the audience. It shows you, because of the age group of the people who are going on the journey, it's sort of like, it sort of points out the audience maybe that the author is trying to target, because okay, there's a message, but who's the audience? So I think that, like, from what I see, the audience is a group of young people who are, and just like the dump, it's mostly young people who are growing up in the dump, and people who are just growing, and it's sort of the idea of growth, and going on a journey and basically like growth.
Yeah, I think so. You're pointing to the age of some of the characters as an important theme there, and there's this theme of secession and growth as well that kind of goes into this.
Yeah, and at the same time, these young people are also looking at older people for help by how they call, how she kept calling, what's his name? How she arrived to Tijuana and she wanted to call
Chava? Irma's Chava?
Yes. And it's sort of like they look at the older people for guidance. And maybe that could be a new message.
Any other thoughts? Please join me in thanking our panelists.